بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم أخواتي وإخواني. اليوم عندنا ضيفة من أوتاوا، من جامعة أوتاوا، سيستر تشارلتون من جامعة تشارلتون. الأخت براك حسين is the International Student Counselor at the Health and Counseling Services at Charlton University. She has an ABA in Psychology and Master as an Education Counselor from the University of Ottawa, and has been counseling students for 9 years. Now, at the Health and Counseling Services, she helps students from all sorts of backgrounds through issues ranging from anxiety, depression, stress, culture shocks, identity challenges, suicide, relationship issues, and more. Barak has participated in many counseling and community-related events, presenting on the topic of Islamic counseling to local participation over the years, in the hope of sharing common faith-based client. Barak believes that counseling is her calling and that her desire to help people is not through the self from the medical point of view, but rather through the soul. With the help of university student, Barak has spearheaded the successful Century Islamic mental health awareness initiative with monthly physically presentations that led up to the 3 days conference in May 2016. This conference was named by the Canadian media as Canada's first Muslim mental health conference. Barak also presented on the 5th WS of Accessing Mental Health resource at the Canadian Muslim Medical Association. She has also created a Facebook forum called the Muslims Counselor to discuss and explore these issues, and will be working on a video series exploring relevant issues from Muslim living in the West. Sister Barak today will be presenting on the topic of how to cope with tragic loss, to help with our community loss of Brother Yusuf al-Hasnawi. Please welcome her with big salawat.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وحبيب قلوبنا سيدنا محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. In his name I begin, peace and blessings be upon Muhammad and his progeny, salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. And the loudest and third of your salawat for the soul of the marhum that we are gathered here for today. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Can we kindly ask that we keep the sound down, inshallah, so everybody can hear and listen? And we can just take the echo off of the sound so we can have a normal lecture, inshallah. It is with great sadness that I come to you today for this event, as I've had the honor and the privilege to visit different communities here in Canada and the States and all around the world to discuss the very important topic of mental health, الصحة النفسية, الصحة العقلية. And today, part of the presentation of what we're going to be talking about is how to cope with such tragic losses and how this affects us. So inshallah, we're going to be taking a look at how to understand grief, al-hazn, al-qahr. We're going to take a look at the 5 stages of grief. We're going to take a look at different responses and how we all respond to grief differently. Gender differences, as this would be an obvious topic to look at as well. How children also react and respond to grief, how to cope with it in general, but specifically for our community here today, coping with the loss through a homicide or a murder. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The basic definition of what grief means, it basically means the intense sorrow that we experience through a loss of a loved one, especially by death. And so people will have different emotions when they experience this loss. I'm going to be speaking both in Arabic and English, but first of all, I just want to have an understanding. Do most of you understand the English? We're okay with the Alhamdulillah, okay. So if there's certain things that you don't understand, I can also explain it in Arabic. And since we started late, I'm actually going to move fast because I know we have a majlis by our respected Sheikh who's here to present. So if there are deeper questions, you can ask me afterwards, inshallah. So to understand the concept of grief, we have to understand there are different types of losses, not just specifically death. We can take a look at, if there's a family that breaks up, or if you lose a friend that you're no longer friends with, or you move, or anything like that. That in itself is a loss, and you can also experience sadness with that. So it's not just necessarily with death. We need to understand that it is a natural reaction. That's a natural, شيء طبيعي. When we lose somebody, it's a normal, natural reaction to have that sadness to it, right? And so grief is also the name for the healing process. We go through that after we lose somebody. And it takes time. And it's gradual. And of course, the most important thing, that it's individual, right? We don't all react and respond the same way. So it also depends on the relationship that you have with this person. Also the circumstances in which this person has passed on. Knowing that somebody's going to pass away, la samahallah, somebody is dying of cancer or another terminal illness, this gives you time to prepare, right? We know hada qadr Allah, and then you prepare yourself for that. I don't think we want to hear myself up there. In any case, so we do have on the Husseiniya Facebook Live, and if you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome, please, to join in. And also on my Facebook as well, we have people from all over the world who are interacting with us today. I know there's lots of communities who've experienced loss over the last few weeks, and they're also participating, so we can learn and benefit from this together. So again, back to the idea in terms of the circumstances, that also will have an effect on how we will potentially grieve this loss. If they were suffering or not, if this was an illness or if it was sudden. Now, losing somebody suddenly in a car accident or a homicide can be very, very traumatic for the family, for the friends, or the community. No matter how old or young that person is or how prepared we are by the concept of death, it can affect you that way for sure. Now, as Muslims, we know we have lots of mental preparations, faith-based preparations, spiritual preparations for that, because we know the concept of death is a certainty in our faith. It's haqq, it's going to happen, we know this. We just don't know when, we don't know how, but we know it's going to happen. It's a part of our aqeedah, it's part of our faith. That concept in itself helps prepare us knowing that. And that also lessens the intensity of the trauma that we could experience. So some people could blame themselves. Like, oh, I should not have done this. Maybe I should have stayed home. In this case, people probably were thinking maybe the brother shouldn't have went outside for those few minutes. I'm sure these thoughts came into your head, right? So things like that. Or the family saying, oh, I wish he didn't get involved in the altercation that took place. Should have, could have, would have. These are things we cannot change. It happened. What do we have control over? What do we have the ability? We have the power and control over how we choose to respond to something. We do not have the power of what happens, right? But we have the power of how we choose to respond. And this helps us when we look at different cultures, when we look at different faiths and customs and rituals, when it comes to grieving. So in our cultures, we have traditions like the 3 days after somebody passes, Yom al-Thalith, or 7 days, the Saba, or al-Arba'in, the 40 days, or 6 months or a year. These are all part of our customs. It could be religious based or it could be cultural based. But these ways of grieving, the grieving process, is the power of healing as well as when we come as a community, right? As when we come together and we embark and we collectively come together to help each other, there's an enormous power to help us through that healing. And so we're familiar with that. And also, like we said, the different time frames as well. The key thing is that it can be a very individual thing, even though we're very community-based as the Iraqi Muslims, Canadians, we're very community-based when it comes to that. And we see this, for example, the different majalis or the different afrah, celebrations or gatherings that we have, especially in Ashura and Muharram, and in any occasion throughout the year. We're very community-based. And this is something really important to keep in mind as your community or any community that is dealing with a tragic loss needs to come together that way, even though it can be a very personal thing. In our gatherings, in our customs, it's more of a group thing. So the 5 stages, so actually I wanted to go back just to one point in terms of our faith. And we know this as Muslims, we said that, you know, it is acknowledged, grief is acknowledged in our faith. And we know this through the examples of the Prophet ﷺ, where he grieved for his wife, Khadija, for a while. We see that Fatima al-Zahra ﷺ grieved for the loss of her father. We saw Sayyidah Zainab, how she grieved for Karbala, Imam Hussein, or Imam Zayn al-Abidin, how he grieved for years after. So the concept of grief is not new for us. It's not foreign. It's very much part of our Islamic culture. And we always say, you know, things to each other like, Libsun al-Aswad bas ala Aba Abdullah, or may you be sad only for Aba Abdullah. But the reality is we will have that within our own families, and we have to understand how to cope and deal with it in a proper way. Part of that understanding comes to understanding the different stages. So Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she is a Swiss-American psychiatrist, and she wrote a very famous book called Death and Dying. And so in her groundbreaking book, she illustrates and talks about the 5 stages of grief. And this was in a very famous article that was published. So the first stage is about denial and isolation. So what do you think happens? This is, by the way, not just me speaking today. I'd like interaction from everybody. So please don't be shy, and I will ask questions so that we can all help each other here. What do you think denial and isolation could mean? First of all, do we all understand what the word denial means?
Disbelief.
Disbelief. Yes, thank you. What else? يعني ما معقولة واحد ما يصدق. Right? So denial. What else? What do you think happens in the first stage here? In this state of denial. So look back to your experience. What happened when you first found out about this horrible situation? You couldn't believe that it was happening, right? What else? Please share. What else was going on through your minds? Shock. This can't be happening, right? And so this is what happens to our brain and our mind and our spirit all together, is trying to normalize the reactions, trying to rationalize the overwhelming, intense emotions that are happening. So this is a defense mechanism. You're almost not feeling anything in that point. Does this sound familiar? Was this happening to a lot of you? Yes? So this is, again, the normal part of the grieving process. Right? So during this time, the denial and the isolation, we block out words and hide from the facts. We don't want to listen or look what's happening on social media or people talking about it. And so during this stage, this is what carries us through the first wave of pain, because you're not feeling the pain at this point. The second stage, anger. What do you suppose is happening in this stage, excuse me? Have you experienced that yet? Al-asabiyya, the anger. I see some nodding. What does that mean to you?
Start finding reasons for it and blaming others for that death or loss.
Right, so they're the initial, exactly, thank you Haji. So this intense emotion is coming from our vulnerable core, makan al-hassas, the one that is being attacked, right? And it's redirected to anger. And so this is probably aimed, like you were saying, at other people, perhaps our partners, our children, our colleagues, or inanimate objects, right? Or strangers or friends. So the anger that is directed here at our dying or deceased loved one, And so rationally, we know that these people cannot be blamed, like the actual person who passed on. We can't blame them. But I'm sure there were thoughts like, why did he go outside? Why did he go outside in that moment, right? I'm sure we had these thoughts. And so during this stage, we also see people who don't have faith, perhaps, will have the intense anger potentially directed towards God as well. God, why did you let this happen? Why did this bad thing happen to this good person? Why do bad things happen to good people? These are philosophical, deep questions that we always come across when we see tragic situations. We know this as Iraqis. Alhamdulillah, inshallah, we never have to see this again with what's happening in our country. But we know the last 10 years, and not one family, as we know, in Iraq, has not been affected by the tragedies that have been taking place over there. It's almost become to the point where if it doesn't happen, it's like, wow, what's going on today? No, it's normalized. And we don't react to this pain anymore. What was that? We're becoming immune, desensitized. And this is a dangerous thing, right? But we see at this point, there's no more anger, there's no more emotion toward it. It's like, hi hayat. Anham ahli nafs الشيء. Hi hayatna. This is our lives, we're used to it. This is sad that we get to that point, but that's the reality of what could happen. We hope this does not happen here. We want to redirect the anger that we feel here for positive movement and good things that could happen for the community.
I think there was also a lot of legitimate anger in this case, because if you study the case and dissect it, you'll know that there was neglecting, there was unprofessionality going on, with the people that you would think their position is, to help people.
Absolutely.
They're there for emergency purposes, and we pay our taxes for them to serve.
And he wasn't taken care of well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was very, very bad.
So the anger here is justifiable considering the circumstances that this could have potentially been prevented. Now, we don't know this as humans. We don't know this. But we will investigate and we see the situation around us and we come to that logical answer of, this potentially could have been prevented. I know when I first heard about this, I was devastated. It's like, of course, this potentially could have been prevented. We don't know. We don't know. And like we were saying earlier, we all have our time. We don't know when. We don't know how. We can say that this was his time. Even though the circumstances make us very angry, and probably a lot of us can really connect with this idea here. Now the third part, or the third stage, is bargaining. So here, the normal reaction to feelings of helplessness and vulnerability is often the need to gain control, because the first two, there's no control, right? So in this third part, we want to negotiate with our environment, right? This is where the if only part comes in our heads, right? If only the medical help could have come sooner. If only ABC. All these questions start coming, right? So this is an attempt to bargain with the circumstances in our minds. So we almost make a deal here with God, in terms of, because this could be a wake-up call for a lot of us as well. Life is so short. What are you going to do? Because this could happen to us. What kind of life have you left? So this is how you start bargaining within yourself and the environment around you and the circumstances, right? This is again still a weaker line of defense, because anger is also a defense, just like denial, to help protect our feelings here, right? So at this point, we start to believe that there was something we could have done differently, perhaps, to have helped, to have done, to change the unchangeable circumstance. The fourth stage is depression. And so there's two types associated. The first one is the reaction. So to practical implications relating to the loss. So sadness and regret, this predominates this type of depression. So we worry about the cost of the burial, like things like that, right? We worry in our grief, have we spent, less time with other people in our families of all of this. So this phase may be eased by simple clarification and reassurance. And so it might be helpful within each other to help each other, more cooperation. The second type of depression is a little bit more subtle. And it's more private to ourselves. So it's a quiet preparation for the separation that we have to deal with to say goodbye to our loved one. And sometimes all we need in this stage, is people comforting each other through hugs. And we're very affectionate people within our culture where we provide that kind of support to each other. And finally, we take a look at acceptance. So during this stage, This stage of grieving is a gift that not many people can get to. Because as we know, death is sudden and it's unexpected, and we may never see, sometimes people may never move beyond the anger stage or the denial. They can be stuck there. This is why we say acceptance is a blessing. And I know as Muslims, most of us, when we talk about death, inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, we are from Him and to Him we return. Asa an tahabbuna shay'un وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Like, we always have these things, and I've always heard this growing up. Whenever there's been a death in my family, in our community, we hear our elders, right, young people? We hear our moms and dads and people in our community say these things from the Quran, from our ahadith. They're not just sayings. There's a psychology and a depth of meaning behind the wisdom of Allah's words that help us accept death, that help us cope and deal with death, as sudden and as tragic as it can be. So during this stage, people excuse me, who are ill and are dying, during this time the acceptance almost comes before. And I work with clients whose families, let's say, are dying, and they've done the crying, they've done, they've gone through these stages before even the person has died. So by the time the person has moved on, the acceptance stage is done. It helps. Now, in the case of a sudden loss, a car accident, a motorbike accident, which is very common with young people, or a homicide, there is no preparation for that. There is no spiritual preparation other than what our faith teaches us. And acceptance in this case, in our community here, might take a long time to get to that healing. I met the father earlier, and it was almost as though he was comforting me, even though I came to give my condolences. That is the power of acceptance. I remember a few years ago at my university, there was young people in a tragic bus accident that took the lives of many people. And I remember the father, when they had a memorial, much like what we're doing here at the university, the young students, the families, the friends, the teachers, they were crying. But the father, although he was a different faith, not a Muslim, his behavior was of one who was submitting to the waqa, to the situation. I saw him comforting people. Just like the father here, I found him comforting, almost giving that. This is somebody who has faith, who has the acceptance. And it is a blessing to get to this stage. And I hope that we can work together today in this understanding to help get everybody to that stage. It may be very difficult. And I know tomorrow there's also an event, a multi-faith event within the community to help bridge healing within the community put on by our Christian brothers and sisters. صلى على محمد وآل محمد. Now, when we talk about typical responses, this is something I'd like you to really pay attention to and observe yourself, observe your family and friends and your children. When we talk about, physical symptoms, of course, your sleep. I'm sure a lot of you have not been able to sleep properly. You could be eating a lot or not eating a lot. تنسد المعدة أكيد when you encounter these types of situations. Could be low energy, headaches, your heart is racing a lot, upset stomach, digestive problems. There's a whole list of physical challenges that could happen when you encounter. These are normal responses. Don't think that there's something wrong with you. This is normal. Emotional, responses. Shock. That was mentioned earlier. Numbing. There could be guilt, like we said, anger, sadness, fear, panic. What else have you encountered with emotions? What else? راجعوا نفسكم. What else have you encountered? Revenge. Thar. That could be a tricky, dangerous one. You need to redirect that anger in a positive, more productive way. And we'll talk more about that.
Towards justice, towards fighting for the cause, and obviously within the borders and the laws and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So your emotional response has been to want to get the haqq and revenge for what happened.
For reformation purposes.
For reformation purposes. Absolutely. Absolutely, because there's been too many incidences in our communities of people of color, people of faith, where they have been brutally murdered and hurt, and there hasn't been an immediate response to help. And we know if it was done to a different type of Canadian, perhaps there could be a different response. It is what it is, and we have to be realistic with that. With behavioral symptoms, people could be seeking closeness with our other loved ones, right? People, or the opposite, pushing people away. So you want closeness, or you could be pushing or isolating yourself, right? Or returning to old coping patterns, which could be unhealthy. So seeking people to talk to, so people want to talk to each other about it. Pacing, agitation, nervousness, talking about the experience repeatedly. So things like, I can't get it out of my head, and just keep talking that way, right? So these are normal behavioral symptoms. And when we talk about spiritual symptoms, it's about seeking meaning. Why did this happen? Right? So big philosophical questions could happen. People could feel abandoned by the spiritual connection here. And yes, people have had this response, anger towards God, creator of the world, just this intense kind of response. Now, I'm not saying you're a kafir for having this type of thoughts, right? It's not about that. It's a normal response to something that is shocking. And if you've had feelings like that, you need to explore that. Talk to the sheikhs, talk to each other, talk to a spiritual person that you can trust to explore these feelings, because it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Just you're feeling something, you're trying to understand why this happened, why do I have these feelings, right? Cognitive symptoms have to do with our thoughts, how we respond that way. So loss of focus or attention. Obviously, anything that is going to cause, anything that is caused like this will cause you to lose focus and attention. Again, looking at searching for meaning, searching for blame or responsibility, and this is very much so in this community. Intrusive thoughts, so thoughts that just coming back, negative, harsh thoughts, right? Playing the experience over and over again, like I can't get it out of my head, it's there. And taking responsibility for things that we didn't know about, or it's out of your control. Because again, this situation is out of your control and you want to take control back. So let's take a look at the difference between grief and depression. What can you tell me in your understanding? What's the difference between grief, القهر الحزن يعني للموت, and depression الكآبة؟ لأنه أكو فرق بين الاثنين. What do you think? What do you think is the difference?
الجريف اللي موجودات على اليسار.
أحسنتم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. You know, humor does help with grief as well. Absolutely. That was a good point, Haji. So I'll just say it then. So when we take a look at grief, it comes in waves, amwaj, right? Over time, it goes away. It's a healthy self-image to have that. There's feelings of hopelessness. It's a response to support. It could be an expression of anger. And it could be that preoccupation with the person that we have lost. This is grief. Depression, on the other hand, the moods and feelings are static, meaning that the sadness stays there. It's consistent with a sense of depletion, that lack of energy, lethargic, right? So a sense of worthlessness in terms of the way that we look at ourselves, right? Hopelessness, constant hopelessness. We're not responsive to support that comes, whereas with grief, we respond to that when people try to help, right? And anger is not really there. I find, depression, people who are low energy and they're sad, there's not much of that anger. Although men and women respond to depression differently. Men tend to show depression through anger. Women don't. It's through more sadness. But here, we're just cross-examining with grief. And then with depression, it's a preoccupation with the self, not with others or the deceased. So you see the difference there? And yes, left and the right. So what about the differences with men and women when it comes to that? Haji, are you going to tell me left and right again? Okay.
No, usually the woman is more emotional.
So why is that? The age-old question. Let's take a step back. Why is it that right away we say women are more emotional? I have met men who are more emotional than women. But why is it overall that women tend to be, and we've heard this in lectures and majalis, why is it that women tend to be more emotional? Because what? We're from Iraq. Actually, Iraqis, men and women are both emotional. We're both very hot-blooded, dam nar, huh?
Because we also practice our emotions a lot.
We express it with our hands, huh? Iraqis, they speak with their Arabs, they speak with hands. But the psychological idea here behind why are women more emotional, it has to do and more sensitive. It has to do with the way, yes, that we are potentially biologically wired. There is that factor, of course, but it also has to do with the way our culture raises us. Women are the more the more fair gender, the more gentle gender. It's aib to be angry or show power or show this or rajula. Like, no, we don't do that with women, right? We raise our children very young. And men, you don't cry. Men, don't show emotion. عيب صر رجال كافي بتشي ماكو بتشي امسح دموعك, right? Like we say things like that. مصح? What else? So it's in the way that we raise ourselves and we condition. Condition, التربية والتعويد, the conditioning of children, young men and women till we're adults. So we don't show a healthy expression of emotion. Whereas we know in our faith, we know from the prophets and the imams, they teach us to show expression and emotion. Do the imams of the prophet, does he not tell the men, what do you say to your wives? I love you. The Prophet himself taught that. Why? He understands the psychology, how this stays in the woman's heart. The Prophet is telling you to show emotion. It's okay. In fact, you're more manly to show emotion that way. You get more respect. So it's in the way. So part of the differences between men and women and emotion and why women are more emotional is because of the way we are raised. And of course, yes, the toughness around us comes from that. So women will express their feelings soon after the loss, perhaps. Men, they take on the more managerial role in terms of, okay, we have to take care of the funeral, we have to take care of the investigation, we have to do the logistical part. So their emotions are taken to the back, right? Women reach out for support. That's why women are very easy, it's easy for women to show expression of emotion because we're used to speaking to each other, right? Men, what do they do with their emotions? They rationalize, they intellectualize, black and white, numbers. Again, this is part of our training, right? So women are seen to express more sorrow, right? Men indicate that they feel more anger, fear, and loss of control when it comes to that. Women are more willing to talk about the loss, let's say, of a child, right? Men will deny and push and ignore more, and they're more private about the grief. I find in our cultures that's not the case, especially when we have gatherings like these in majalis, where we are free to show our grief. And especially in the majalis of Abdullah, where it's encouraged to show that grief, right? We know when that tear comes down, in the name of Ahlul Bayt, there's barakah and blessings. Psychologically, when that tear comes down, toxins are released from our body, which is why you feel good after you cry, when emotions come out. Subhanallah. So the double blessings there. And this is in the science of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'm going to speed things up a little bit. Sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, I got a question. So is this what you were saying is just because cultural factor impact emotional from men and women? Is it like this general for every culture? Just from distinct from human nature?
I find it is general across cultures that this is somewhat standard. You have in some cultures a little bit more where people will show more. Like I was saying, in our Iraqi, Husseini type of culture, you know, we express more grief because we have trained and conditioned ourselves through the majalis, for example. So when we have gatherings for a loved one, excuse me, like a Fatiha, you know, we have the rituals. We read the Quran, we have a majlis, and we keep saying Al-Fatiha for blessings. But then when we have the actual majlis, you know, both the women and the men are crying. So some cultures are more prone to expressing grief than others. And I find in the I call it the Husseini culture, we have that. So when we have our own for the people that are loved ones that are lost, we're used to it. We know how to express. Some cultures are not. You see funerals in different cultures here in North America. The funerals are very different. They're very structured and ordered and almost like an event. Well, we can't judge by saying that it's cold. There's a different expression of emotion. We express, we cry. Have you not seen the mothers, how they cry over their children? There's almost a culture, there's almost an expectation of it where, I'm not going to show you how, but we know how it's done. Like the yaweli, the dagulatam, like it's there, it's encouraged. And so young children see that. And when it happens to them, they're copying the modeled behavior that is in front of them. So it's how we show that to each other as well. Does that answer your question, Haji? No problem. Some cultures will show more than others, definitely. It's in the way, again, that we are conditioned to do so. So children, if they are old enough to love, they are old enough to grieve. But they will grieve differently. They will show it differently, right? They will show their grief according to their developmental stage, right? In terms of how abstract the concept of death is to them. And this is a whole other lecture on itself. I'm not going to get into it, but each stage, like 0 to 2, 2 to 6, 6 to 11, and whatnot, during these different age, and it's interesting, I did a lecture a few months ago on the 3 stages that we have of development from the hadith of the Prophet, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, and compared it to Western psychological development. And they're very similar, how each stage the children learn different things, thoughts, behavior, interactions, and how the Prophet recommends certain ways of teaching our children according to their developmental. And it's fascinating when you cross-examine it. So that's a whole other thing. But what I want you to understand from this concept is that during each stage of the development of the child, they will express their grief differently according to what is abstract to them, the concept of death. Because then they will think they have the idea of reversibility, that that person will come back, right? And they have their own acceptance as well. The older children will have the acceptance of understanding this person is not coming back, right? So it's important to connect with them at the level of their understanding, right? And so we understand they don't grieve like we do. They may not openly talk about it like we do. And a death in their life usually causes them to feel even more different. So we have to look out for these signs. And there's different groups for children in the community, like psychology groups, where I would encourage you, if you're finding that you see your children are struggling, don't ignore it, because they are the ones who are ignored, the children, because we are dealing, as the parents, as the adults, we are dealing with the grief. We forget the little ones. And it's really important to pay attention to the little ones that we have in our community and get them the proper support and help. So what do we do? What do we do when we encounter these challenges? We act normal, act natural. We don't need to hide. We know this is normal. We know death is haqq. We want to show genuine care and concern. We want to make it clear that we are there for each other to listen. Talk openly and directly about the person who died, not hide. Keep in mind that sometimes different events could be really challenging for people. This is still fresh for us here. But for those of us who are dealing with past deaths, we have anniversaries, right? Or different events, and we remember the loss of those people. So it's important to keep these things in mind. What not to do. Do not shelter children from the reality of death. This, because it's a learning experience for them, right? Do not give them false or confusing messages. For example, Bibi Naima hassa, Namat Bibi. No, we can give them more than that, because then what happens with that expectation? They're expecting the grandmother to wake up, right? We don't tell a child to stop crying because other people might get upset, because then you're stopping the natural grieving process of that, right? We don't want to try to cheer the person up or distract them from the emotional intensity. And people, they mean well though, right? They want to say, oh, this person's in a better place, they're no longer in pain. I find that takes away from the genuineness though. But it all depends. Some people may be accepting to this, some people may not. Do not offer advice or quick solutions like, I know how you feel. Time will heal. Although I've done that in my therapy too. I've said that to people. But it's because I've experienced. I know over time, 2 weeks is still fresh. A month is still fresh. But I know 6 months or a year, the pain will not be as intense. It will always be here, but it won't be as intense. That we can assure you. We don't want to dig into people's private matters, of course, when it comes to this, and asking questions. Now, in this case, I know this is different because this was a murder. It's a different situation. We want to ask questions. We want to investigate. We want to ask the authorities. We want to know what happened. We want justice, like you said. So each situation is different in this manner. How do we cope? Well, what we have here tonight is almost a support group. So if you have support groups in the community as well, not just the Muslim community, outside as well, I encourage you to engage in that. See a psychologist, and I know this is a problem in our community, especially when it comes to mental health. واحد يروح يشوف طبيب نفساني يقول له هذا مخبل. That's the response we have. You see a psychologist, that means you were crazy, there's something wrong with you. That is not the case. We don't go see a psychologist just for that. Let me ask you a question. If you break your leg, you go see a sheikh? With all due respect to the sheikh. Do you see a sheikh? Or do you go see a doctor? Maybe for du'as, absolutely. But you break your leg or your arm, who do you go see? You go to the doctors, you get the medication, you set your legs, right? Can you pray with a broken leg at first? Possibly not, over time as it heals. But you're going to pray in a different way, right? Now, if your spirit is broken, عندكم حالة نفسية, your mental health, you have a mental illness. You have tawattur, anxiety. You have depression, sadness, deep sadness. Absolutely. But this person is broken, like a broken leg. A man has a broken leg, a woman has a broken leg. You tell them, go read a dua? No. You tell them, go see a doctor. Get it fixed. Same thing with somebody who's a broken spirit if they're mentally ill. They need to be initially taken care of, fixed at first, so to speak. See a professional. Because this person could also have thoughts of wanting to end their life. Losing hope, suicide, al-intihar. And this is something that we don't talk about, and it's scary. But this is what happens with people who are severely depressed. So you need to see a professional. Get the immediate help to get this person's bones, so to speak, healing. When this person is eating better, because they could not be eating. They could not have energy. They're not functioning properly. Right? Feed them, they get back on track. They're eating well, they're sleeping well, they're exercising, they're doing better in school. At this point, the person is open for spiritual healing, is open for the du'as. نفسيتهم متفتحة لهذا الموضوع. But at first they're not. Just like the person who is in physical pain with a broken leg. Is that du'a going to help him in that moment? Or he's like, give me the morphine to deal with the pain. Same thing when it comes to mental illnesses. And that's why in our communities, and that's why we're pushing the agenda of mental health, the الصحة النفسية العقلية, in our Muslim communities, because we are afraid of talking about these issues. Does it always have to result in somebody taking their lives before we take action? Does it always have to result in abuse in the homes and a breaking up of the homes for people to finally take action? No, it doesn't. Because this is in our faith to begin with. If you just look at the lives of the Prophet and the Imams, how they talk about as-sahha an-nafsiyya. It's there. Islamic counseling, it's been there from 1400 years ago. For example, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ala bi-dhikrillah tatma'inna al-qulub. Right? There's serenity and peace bi-dhikrillah. Right? That in itself is Islamic counseling and psychology right there. Again, another time, but this point here is to encourage you to be open to the concept of seeking professional help if you are not well. Just like if you break a leg, just like if you have diabetes, just like if you have cardiovascular diseases, because a dua initially is not going to lower your sugar levels. The insulin will. Spiritually, you will feel better after you take care of yourself physically. Journaling, al-kitaba, writing, your emotions, eating well, exercising, getting enough rest, and potentially taking medications that can lower the intensity of the symptoms that you were dealing with. Now, some of you could not be sleeping right now, right? You could be experiencing a lot of challenges with your sleep. Perhaps sleeping medication can help you get a good night rest So the next day you can eat, so you can exercise, so you can deal with the emotions of the loss and the grief that you are dealing with right now. Does that make sense? So learning about death, this is an opportunity. We know this. We know this as Muslims. Whenever we encounter death, we learn more about it. We talk about haqq. We talk about this is happening to us, right? Learning about how we respond to it. Seeking comforting rituals, healthy, right? So avoiding major decision making right now because we are not fully stable right now. So don't make rash decisions about things. Allowing your emotions to express themselves and also connecting spiritually within the community. Now, when it comes to the death that this community specifically has dealt with, it's a little bit different because we are dealing with a murder. It's hard to understand the complexities, right? And so it has its own denial and shock. So we're going to talk the stages of death that we spoke about, or sorry, the stages of grief that we encountered earlier, they're going to come here differently, right? So denial and shock could be different in terms of this is unbelievable, how could this happen? It's a crime, it's all together, all at once, right? Anger, and I've already seen that here. It's no longer just on the outside, it's deeper. There's a need for justice here, right? And questions such as why, how? Why did this happen to this young man when he could have potentially have gotten help sooner? So these things, right? So it's important during these challenges here. And we talk about forgiveness, and I know this is a very hard concept to swallow right now. It's probably still early in the stages of grief that we're dealing with here. We can talk about that perhaps in a different time. But like we said, murder and homicide, it has its own deeper level of denial and shock. And we need to recognize these things. And in terms of the anger, you may feel it longer. And it's important to find constructive ways, like we were saying earlier. Find healthy ways of expressing this anger. Give yourself permission to feel that. But it has to be expressed in healthy ways. Do not be vigilantes and take this on your own. There is a system here that we can work with together to try and find what you need to heal and trying to find the answers as well. Continuing with that, we said grief after murder has many expressions. So our grief, like we said, is unique to us individually. So some may get involved in the legal case, and I heard that that's going to be the case here, right? Some may not. Others may want to face the people who did this. Some people may not. Again, this is a normal response. Know that finding the person who did this, it could cause more challenges for you as well. Because we're not equipped to deal with these kind of things. This is not a normal, everyday type of thing that we deal with. So it's going to be hard to connect with that idea. So,
sorry, can you go back to the fasting thing?
The what, sorry?
The fasting thing, you said some people they want to fast.
They want to face the person who hurt or killed the loved one. Some people want to, like, you know how we've seen this in Iraq, for example, the mothers of the shuhada, where they want to see the person who killed their sons. We've seen this all on TV. So some people want.
No fasting, like no fasting, like this. Like we believe in law, and we believe like that never happened to anybody. It doesn't matter for him or for anyone in this country. I think we believe this way, like totally different law. I don't know. Maybe I cut you wrong way.
It's okay. You can, if you want, we can talk about that after, inshallah. But this is, like I said, this is an unusual circumstance. So we don't know how to respond. Some people may want to, others may not. So just keep that in mind. And of course, homicide is especially horrifying because another person's action took an innocent life. And so the idea of this tragic loss of a loved one determined by another human being is devastating to the mind. It's hard to swallow. It's hard to connect with that. It can also be incomprehensible that it's just a random act that took place, right? The person who did this, we may know them or we may not. In this case, it was a random act of violence that took place on the street, right? And so the shock of losing someone, like we said, it can really hold family members and leave them really shocked and really bewildered in terms of how to deal with that. And I know in Ottawa, last year, I think a year or 2 years ago, a young man was stabbed to death in the Iraqi community. And it was horrifying. We didn't know how to respond and react. We knew this young man when he was a little child and he was 18, 19 years old. And the whole community recoiled. It was very devastating. But subhanAllah, 2 years later, I see the mother now in our community. سلمت نفسها للواقع. Like she has accepted the circumstance. She doesn't wear black anymore. And she has, moved on, so to speak. But her son's life was taken in a violent act. And it was very hard for her to connect and accept, but she did, subhanAllah. And this is the concept where we talk about over time. The pain won't be as intense. It will lessen over time. So I would like to finish off here with a few reminders for everybody. From my personal experience, somebody who has dealt with death in the family, death of family, older, people in the family, sudden death as well, tragic death within the community, but also as a professional where I work with people and I see the expression of grief within my community, other communities, but also in my work. So things to take with you. We all deal with grief differently. We respond differently. Today we took a look at differences between men and women, how we grieve. We took a look at children. We took a look at perhaps personalities of how people who are more expressive or whatnot, they will show that more, right? So keep that in mind. Understanding how to take time for yourself. If you need time off work, if you need time off school, engage, talk to your bosses, talk to work, talk to the people at school. And space as well. Recognize your own response to grief. Some people I know within the communities, like we were saying, men tend to become more of the managerial type because they have to take care of logistics, but then they will deny what's going on internally, right? So even the women who are experiencing this, recognize what's going on, allow yourself to feel the emotion, reach out, speak to other people, go to group therapy as well. This has been proven to help. And we actually have that at my university, a group for grief counseling, and we have a counselor who's trained in that, that's her work. And so when we have students who come and deal with grief, I will send them to this group because not everybody will understand the pain of death and loss unless somebody else has experienced that. And when you have a group of people who are all together experiencing it, it's incredibly healing and powerful because sometimes you don't need to say words. Just being together is incredibly healing. And of course, the community, the spiritual, the religious support, all of that is incredibly vital to help and support one another. And with that, I ask you to again read Surah Al-Fatiha for the blessed soul of Brother Yusuf Al-Hasnawi, proceeding with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So how to prepare yourself for these types of situations? Are there mechanisms? Well, at the very beginning, we talked about Arabi لو بالإنجليزي. الاثنين عربي okay. عفوا. مثل ما قلنا بالبداية إن إحنا كمسلمين نعرف إحنا مهيئين روحنا لفكرة الموت. إحنا نعرف هذا الشيء. الموت حق وإحنا دائما نعرف هذا الشيء راح يصير. شلون نهيئ نفسنا روحيا. هاي يجوز الشيخ يقدر يعطينا هالمعلومات أكثر بعدين، بس الناحية العلمية psychologically نفس الشيء إحنا نعرف هذا الشيء راح يصير. شلون نهيئ نفسنا إن هذا الحق it's the reality. ماكو فد شيء معين أقدر أقول لكم إلا بهاي الطريقة هذه. we know it's gonna happen. نعرف هذا الشيء راح يصير، ما نعرف يمتى، ما نعرف شلون، بس هذا الشيء راح يصير. هاي الفكرة هي قوية. ولازم نلتزم نفسنا بالأفكار الدينية السبيريتشوال اللي عندنا الروحانية تهيئنا هذا الواقع. أكثر من هذا ما أعرف شو أقول، لأن بالذات بهالشغلات هاي واحد ما يتوقع هذا الشيء راح يصير بمجتمعاتنا. We don't expect that somebody from our community is going to be killed or murdered. You can't prepare for that. You can't. Obviously you cannot prepare for a shock like that. واحد ما يقدر يهيئ نفسه لهاي الفكرة. بس شنو قلنا ذيك الساعة مثلا أهالينا بالعراق عودوا روحهم إن هذا الشيء. أولاد خوالي من يطلعون من البيت ذاك اليوم خطية بن خالتي يقول لي من نطلع من البيت نروح للدراسة للشغل نسلم على أهلنا كأنما ما راح نرجع، ما نعرف. هذا شيء مؤلم. واحد عمره 20 بداية حياته يفكر بهالطريقة هذه، هذا مهيئ روحه. This person has prepared themselves for death. Because we know that in Iraq, when a young man or woman leaves their house, you don't know if they're coming back. It's unfortunate. Inshallah, now this has changed. So you cannot necessarily prepare yourself for a shock like that. But you can help heal. واحد يقدر يساعد يعالج روحه. مثل اللي احنا ما قاعد نسوي هسه. نعم. That's why it's called a shock. Absolutely. That's why you're in denial. That's why you're in anger. الواحد ما يعرف شلون يعني يواجه هيك ظروف.
الواحد يدرسها بعمقها ودائما يكون متقرب لها فيكون يعني مستعد الى مفاجآت او مصايب يعني
exactly.
لانه ماكو مصيبه مثل تبع عبد الله وانصاره واحنا على هذا النهج وسوينا عهد يعني مو يعني هي لعبه نقول سلم لمن سالمك وحب لمن حاربك.
احسنت.
يعني لازم نكون قول وفعل فلازم نكون مستعدين ان نضحي من اولادنا مو يعني ان احنا رايحين ندفعهم بس يعني ان احنا لازم ننهي عن المنكر ونمر بالمعروف كذا فاذا اولادنا نعلمهم على القران كذا وتطبيق القران فهو من داخله لما يشوف ظلم ما راح يقدر يسكت يعني صعبه عليه يريد يساعد يعني عرفتي؟
نعم.
هذا الولد قرأ القران سبحان الله ورأسا طبق القران يعني.
It's incredible, amazing, subhanallah. يعني حتى يعني واحد ممكن يقول إنه نوع من الاستشهاد هذا يعني you could say شهادة يعني. So you bring up good points. راح أقولها أنا بالإنجليزي وبعدين عربي إنجليزي. فإحنا يعني نقول مسلمين، إحنا نقول تربية، إحنا نقول نعلم أولادنا، نعرف هاي الشغلات كلها. طب النار تطلع منا. These things we know them. It's almost just talk now. The reality is when you call yourself a Husseini, when you call yourself a Zainabiyya, what does that mean? It doesn't just mean lip service. It doesn't just mean we come here دق ونلطم ونبكي. لو مثلا وقت المحاضرة when the sheikh is speaking we sit and gossip. People come here for social gatherings. It's not like that. What does it really mean to be a human at this point? Forget faith. Because we know what Imam Hussein stood for. It's all humanity, not just for Muslims, right? So what does it mean to actually apply these things? It really does mean in every day of your life. Not just the 10 days of Muharram, not just in Arba'iniyah, not just in specific events throughout the year. What does it really mean to apply these things? And I think when we experience these kinds of shocking deaths in our community, it wakes you up. It wakes you up to the problems that we have in our community. Look at this beautiful young man. He was reading Quran here in this very same center.
Same place where he was at.
Wow. His spirit, I'm sure you feel his spirit in here. In the same exact spot, he was here. And he walked out. And it was his time and he left. What does this say about this human being as a lesson for all of you who are here today? What does this tell you? What is this lesson for you? This is an opportunity for you to reflect on your life. With everything that we learned today, we talked about the psychological response. What about the spiritual response to your reality? What is this young man's life? His lesson of reading Quran. Then he goes out and he sees an elderly being assaulted. And he goes and he tries to save him and he gets shot. Is this not an act of a hero? Selfless, altruistic. That is the act of a Husseini. What does this say to you, the young men and women who are here today? And the men and the women and the problems that you encounter at home. How are you going to challenge yourself to make things better for yourself and for your children? Is it just talk? This is a wake-up call for this community. All the communities who experience these kind of losses. I cannot believe that I'm actually sitting in the exact same spot as this young man. What does this mean to you? This is what it means to reflect. Muhasabat al-nafs. That nafs, that self. Nafs al-lawwama that is constantly telling you to get to that nafs al-mutma'inna, to feel that place of serenity. Just like this young man probably felt No thoughts, no second thoughts. When he saw that man being attacked, he went and helped. He didn't think about his safety. What does that say about you and your actions and the things that we all need to change within ourselves? This is a lesson for us. Why do we have to wait for Ashura and Muharram and Arba'een for lessons? Every day you have the opportunity to change for the better. And your community, this is your opportunity to make changes. Whether a husband who beats his wife, wake up, what you're doing is haram. A woman who's not respecting her husband, demanding money, demanding all these things, and he's hardworking. Woman, wake up. Men and women disrespecting each other in front of their children. Your children are watching you. You are their model. This behavior will repeat itself. People in positions of authority. Are you respecting the position that you are in to help people who are in need? Students who are working hard. This is your struggle, your jihad, right? What are you going to do? Are you playing wasting your parents' money or OSAP and all that? What are you going to do to better yourself? For yourself to get a degree, to give back and contribute to society. This young man was studying to be a doctor, mashallah. Not many people can get into medical school. He wanted to give back to his community. Yet his life was taken away. This is a lesson for all of you. What does this mean to you? Reflect. It is not easy. But it is a wake-up call for all of us. And I say this to remind myself as well, the things that I need to work on for myself, just like we all need to reflect within ourselves and with him. What can we do to change within ourselves to be better? Because this young man's life should not be forgotten and gone in vain, because his act of heroism is incredible. It was not easy for me to come down here today. It was a challenge. Those of you who know how hard it was for me to come down here, it was a journey. But something told me I needed to come down here today. I wanted to be here and help. I wanted to come and share. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm supposed to sit in this spot. Who knows? But it was very hard to come down here, and I kept coming. I felt that I needed to be here and sharing this grief in my community as well. The second I heard about it, I couldn't believe that it happened. Picked up the phone and through social media, finally got a hold of the Hajj. And subhanAllah, it happened quickly. That it wasn't easy coming down here. Had a nail in my tire, I had to get another car, 2-3 cars. I actually stayed overnight because of the storm. I couldn't drive. Got up this morning, my car stopped in the middle of the highway. Waited 2-3 hours for another car, and I didn't care. I'm like, something told me to come. My friends told me to go back to Ottawa. It was closer for me to go back. I'm not saying this to say, look how I got here. I'm saying this because there's a point. Something told me I needed to come here. I don't know what it was. But I think the energy in the room here today is answering that question right now. To be here for each other, to really support one another, and to understand grief, to understand how you're going to apply this in your lives daily. Because this is not an easy thing that you are experiencing. Allah yasa'adkum. And I share my condolences with you and for all of those people who were shocked about this situation. And we send our condolences to your community. But my question that I throw back to you, what are you going to do about this for yourself individually and as a community? How are you going to grow and learn from this? How are you going to be there for each other? How are you going to change the difficult situations in your own community? How are you going to honor this beautiful soul, his act of heroism? How are you going to honor that?
Respect this person.
And that's the thing. There's such a negative view on Muslims in the media against women who are oppressed, men who are terrorists, etc., etc. Yet this young man, unknowingly, the way he departed this world proves what Muslims, real Muslims, are all about. In his act of altruism, in his act of kindness. Inspire, let yourself be inspired by this. Don't take this for granted. How are you going to always honor this young man? I've taken a lot of time. If there are no other questions.
This one I call it revolution.
Naam?
I call it revolution.
thawra, a spiritual revolution in the sense of how are you going to inspire yourself, nafsiyatkum. But how are you going to let that now continue within the community? How are you going to help others? And how are you going to bring some kind of justice? Because like you said, nationwide now, people are aware of the situation now. And inshallah, tomorrow I hope to see a lot of people from this community at the memorial, at the church, because this is a beautiful act within our Christian brothers and sisters who've reached out to your community to honor this hero. So I hope to see many of you tomorrow in honoring back, inshallah.